How we doing, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Master Syndrome Whiskey Room. I am Jason C, and if you're a subscriber, welcome back. Nice to see you again. If it's your first time here and you're looking for the latest in whiskey and bourbon news and reviews, you have come to the right channel. So think about hitting that subscribe button and think about hitting that bell notification right next to it so you know when I'm putting out a new video. Today, I'm reviewing my first Bunnahabhain Scotch whiskey. This is Bunnahabhain 12. Really excited to get into this one. This is an Islay single malt Scotch, but it's a little bit different than the other Isleys that you may know. And I have been sipping on this a little bit. What I've kind of learned, and for those of you that have followed my channel, I really kind of started drinking Scotch a lot back in September, trying different expressions, really trying Scotches from different regions of Scotland, learning about all the flavor profiles. And I think one of the most startling things that I've learned is that really, to review a Scotch properly, I really think you need to drink it down a little bit, let it breathe, and then you can really get the true nature of what the Scotch flavor profile is. So, can't wait to get into this one with you guys. This is the first time, as I mentioned, me trying a Bunnahabhain. So in the way I always love to do when I try something for the first time, a first distillery, let's get into a little bit of history before we get into the review. So Bunnahabhain, which means mouth of the river in Gaelic, stands at the mouth of the Margadale Spring on the shores of the Sound of Islay, the northernmost part of Islay. It first came to existence in 1883. However, its origins can be traced back 4 years earlier when in 1879, William Robertson of Robertson and Baxter Blending House joined with the Greenlees brothers to create the Islay Distillery Company. In 1930, with most of Europe still struggling from an economic downturn in the aftermath of the Great War, Bunnahabhain Distillery unfortunately closed its doors. However, thanks to the Bunnahabhain spirit, they opened once again just 7 years later. Now, while much of Islay hasn't changed, in 1960, one of the biggest changes was a new road that was built. The boats traveling along the Sound of Islay had been Bunnahabhain's lifeline for supplies for so long, but with the introduction of the road, supplies can now reach them easier by land. The creation of the road and the increase in supplies was incredibly timely, and as word of Bunnahabhain's delicious whiskey spread and demand soared, a second pair of stills were installed in 1963 to increase the production capacity. Now in 2006, 3 years after being purchased by Burn Stewart Distillers, a major rebrand was launched with the redesign of the 12-year-old packaging and the launch of an 18-year-old and a 25-year-old bottlings. They quickly took their place alongside the 12-year-old as part of the core range, a range that's still as popular today as it was back then. So 2010 marked yet another historic moment in the evolution of Bunnahabhain, with their whiskeys returning to being produced non-chill filtered with a natural color at 46.3% ABV, just as they had been by the original forefathers of Bunnahabhain. In 2014, Burn Stewart merged with Distell, which heralded more investment into both the brand and the distillery. And in 2017, the packaging was further modernized and the portfolio of product was extended even further. So a pretty cool story with Bunnahabhain. I love reading back and trying to find out how they started, what the history was. It's always fun to do with distilleries that you really don't know much about. So today we are trying the 12-year-old expression, which was originally introduced in 1979 to great acclaim. As I mentioned, this has the new packaging with the red label that was added in 2017. Now, when you normally pick up any bottle of a 12-year-old Scotch from the famous Isle of Islay, the flavor that comes to mind typically is an exceptionally smoky, peaty dram like Ardbeg or Laphroaig. But Bunnahabhain, however, has taken a different approach from its many counterparts on Islay, declaring themselves the gentle taste of Islay and saying that they offer a dram that embodies the island's more approachable side. So after tasting Bunnahabhain's 12-year-old single malt for the first time, I can tell you the claim is absolutely true. It is also the least peated whiskey produced on the island, coming in at only 3 ppm of peat compared to 55 ppm for Ardbeg on the other end of the spectrum. Alright guys, now as I mentioned, this is the core 12-year single malt Scotch whiskey bottled at 46.3% ABV, unchill filtered, and with natural color, which is very much appreciated. This is aged in a combo of sherry, bourbon, and whiskey refill casks. MSRP is about 55 to 60 bucks. So let's open it up here. There we go, guys. Let's get a pour. Might as well keep the camera here. Get a nice pour of this whiskey. All right, let's get into it. As we mentioned, Burn Stewart, who's one of the primary owners of Bunnahabhain, they also own Deanston as one of their lines of whiskeys as well. And Deanston also comes in at that 46.3% ABV, non-chill filtered, natural color. And this was a really, really big favorite of mine too. I've already been drinking this down a lot. It's definitely changed a little bit flavor-wise, especially for the better. So really can't wait to try this Bunnahabhain. So let's get to the nose, guys. Here we go. This is just tons of dark fruits on the nose. I mean, it's so inviting. It's such an amazing nose. I've been thinking about this and saying it over and over from the day I opened this whiskey. You could really smell the sherry influence on this. A lot of dark fruits, but there are some influences there from the bourbon casks as well, which I love. Such a great balance. Now there is a very, 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 very slight hint of smoke. I mean, it's barely there. So if you're into really smoky, peaty scotches, this probably will not do it for you. It might surprise you, being it's an Islay whiskey. So this has a very nutty characteristic too, which I think also is probably from those ex-whiskey and ex-bourbon casks as well. So when I first nosed this whiskey, it immediately took me back to my grandmother. She used to, so I grew up in an Italian family, and we made this candy called gugulina, which is basically a sesame seed candy that's either cooked with, you kind of mash it together with either nougat or molasses. It's extremely sweet. But what she would do is she would get some fresh grapes, special like wine grapes, put them in a pot and cook them down to get it real syrupy and gooey. And then that would actually be her base to mix the sesame seeds together. And then, also, I think she would throw some almonds in there too, some other different nuts. And then kind of once that became like a solid form, she would break it up into like this delicious sesame seed brittle type candy. And this whiskey completely took me back there, and I love when a whiskey can do that. It's just so good. I mean, there's a pretty slight vanilla influence there too. You're getting some caramel. I just love the nose. I could go on about it for a long time. So let's get into the taste and see how it is. So cheers, everybody. Oh man. I absolutely love this scotch. So immediately up front, vanilla and dark fruits just attack the palate. It's so strong. That non-chill filtration, that 46.3% ABV, it just coats the palate so well. The finish just kind of stays with you just slightly. It's not a super long burn, but it's enough to know that, that, hey, I'm drinking something that's a little bit higher ABV, and it's there. So let's get into another sip and see what other flavors we could pull out. Here we go. Yeah, so you get those dark fruits in there, almost like plums or maybe even a little bit of cherry there, raspberry. So good. Then kind of after that front palate kind of goes through, after it gets to your mid palate towards the back of the throat, then you're getting more of those caramel vanilla flavors, more of those that bourbon influence there. It's really, really good. And then it's kind of finishing not on a smoky note at all. On the palate, there is just, at least to me, there is no peat in here that I could taste or pull out. But if there is a smoky, if there's a smoky influence, it's finishing more on a black pepper note rather than a peaty smoke note, which is very welcoming. Let's go in for another sip, guys. Yeah, as I mentioned, the palate still, the more you sip on it, it's so mouth coating, it's almost syrupy and creamy. The way it kind of just coats your palate, and Man, those vanillas and caramels, the dark fruits really stay with you. And then you get that slight wave of maybe a smoke, but to me it's coming through, like I said, as a more of a black pepper. It's really, really delicious. I mean, the fruit flavors in this are really punching through too. It's so good. It's such a well-balanced dram. I really like that mix of the sherry and the ex-bourbon casks. It's really good. All right, guys, let's go in for one last sip. So one thing I really wanted to mention, something that I did not taste when I first opened this bottle, was these baking spice notes that I'm getting. I mean, it's very light, almost a cinnamon and clove right there in the end to go along with that black pepper. But like I said, as you sip a bottle of scotch down, it really starts to evolve, and this one has been no exception. This is absolutely delicious. I feel like every time I try a new scotch, I add it to my favorites list. This one is no exception. I really, really love this, and definitely is going in my, top 3, top 5 that I've tried so far. If you followed me since back in September, when I started my scotch journey, I started tasting all these different ones. The ones on the sweeter side that are aged exclusively in sherry casks, really, they were sweet, and I really did like them. But I feel like the ones that are more mixed with, they use bourbon and sherry, mix of whiskey casks and sherry casks to really round out those flavors, tend to be the ones that I'm enjoying, aside from the Islas. The typical Islay whiskeys like Ardbeg and Lagavulin and Laphroaig, I am absolutely loving those, which is surprising for me being a bourbon guy. But I will tell you now that if you are an Islay fan, you've never had a Bunnahabhain, Bunnahabhain is not your typical Islay. You are not going to get the smoke and that flavor punch, that peatiness that you're going to get in Laphroaig, Lagavulin, or Ardbeg. This is definitely the softer side of Islay. It's more rounded, more fruity, more sweet, vanilla, caramels. For $55 to $60, I highly recommend anyone trying this scotch. It's absolutely delicious. All right, guys, well, thanks again for watching the Mash and Drum Whiskey Room. Really appreciate you stopping by, watching this awesome review for Bunnahabhain 12. Hope you guys get one. If you haven't yet, please hit the subscribe button. Please hit that like button below. You can also find me on Instagram and Twitter. If you've had this, let me know what you think down either in the comments or on Instagram or Twitter. Let me know what you think. Let me know if you love it as much as I do. Love chatting with you guys, and as I always say, it is not about the whiskey, it is the people you share it with. So cheers, everyone, and I will see you again soon.